I am an award-winning costume designer for TV, film, opera, and stage. I received my bachelor's in business administration in marketing from Howard University. I also received a corporate MBA from Florida International University. Shortly after that, I decided I wanted to continue school. And so I received a certificate in fashion design and marketing from London Fashion College, Central St. Martin's. Lastly, I was offered the opportunity to be a part of the illustrious program at University of Maryland, where I received my master's in fine arts. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself, three of my favorite things that I like to do is, first and foremost, is self-care. And I made it quite plain. And, it's just what it says. I like to take time off when I can and to rejuvenate. And while I'm taking time off to rejuvenate, and sometimes when I'm working, I'm a student of my craft, right? And so I will always study. And I know it sounds like a little bit of overkill, because it is, but I like to read and study the greats so that I can continuously grow and kind of collage different experiences, different artists, not just costume designers, to broaden my perspective so that when it's time for me to create, I have that toolbox. Lastly, I actually do like to write. I feel like everything you take in as an artist, as a human, it must come out. So I journal as much as I can. And it's kind of interesting when I go back to my journal, because I see like different milestones and points of, where my mentality was and sometimes maturity level. So let's get into it. What is costume design? In short, costume design is the visual language used to communicate the overall appearance of a character or performer. When dressing a character, one should refer to the style of dress, particularly to a nation. It could be nation meaning location, class, or period for television, film, and stage. This career is beyond rewarding, as you get to learn about those while creating memorable looks for generations to admire. And as you can see below, these are all of the artists below, costume designers, as well as Givenchy, who's a fashion designer. They've all touched me in different ways. I remember when I stepped foot at Howard University, Reggie Ray, who's the gentleman with the sketches, I didn't know 15 years post that he would then become my mentor and actually welcome his arms and introduce me into the world of costume design. To the right of him with the glasses, as we all know, it is the iconic Edith Head, to whom I study and watch and revere. We have the illustrious and very well-talented Ruth Carter, who's a mentor of mine as well. And then to the right of Ann Roth, who's also a mentor of mine, who designs for a stage as well as television and film. And then we have Cindy Powell, who I absolutely adore. So I kind of use this chopped up quote because I want everybody that's present to understand that manifestation is real. So I started off with, watch your words, they become your destiny. I manifested this career while I was working at Howard University full time. I knew nothing about this field, but I would say all the time, literally out of my mouth, that I wanted to become a costume designer. Shortly thereafter, the universe awarded me my desires, and I went back to school, as I mentioned, to get my second master's in costume design from University of Maryland, College Park. Before my graduation, I met Mr. Lee at my late great mentor Reggie Ray's Broadway musical debut, Holler If You Can Hear Me, based on the music of Tupac Shakur. And shortly thereafter, I was offered my first project in TV, which was She's Gotta Have It, the television show. And I have to say that because sometimes when I say that, it's like, you weren't born. That premiered on Netflix, and the rest is history. As I mentioned in the last slide, my mentors are Reggie Ray. I would like to publicly say Helen Huang, who took a chance on me to be a part of the program at University of Maryland. She's the director of costume design there. Steven Soderbergh, who's an iconic director, Ann Roth, and Ruth Carter. Here you will see some of my filmography, particularly for TV and film, and also commercials. So the first image you see is actually, it's funny because I tell people BLACKKKLANSMAN was not my first feature. The Day Shall Come, which is the picture to the far left of the gentleman on the horse. That was my first feature, and that was produced and filmed in Dominican Republic. To the right of that was a very special project. I was able to collaborate with Usher, and we did a short movie celebrating Black excellence. So this particular project, I would say it took you through time, if you will. But this particular photo is what became the promo for that project. And then to the right, we have Passing. The cool part about Passing is it was completely filmed in black and white. So to be a costume designer and have to train my eye or switch my eye back and forth from color to black and white and how it would be visualized through the camera, that was really, really enriching. The last photo, you have BLACKKKLANSMAN, which was beyond iconic. And that was actually my second feature. The image of Serena Williams was a Super Bowl commercial. It was my first huge commercial during the Super Bowl. And in this, I had the opportunity to recreate costumes from The Big Lebowski, which was cool because I was able to step back and actually watch the movie, and then say, how can I put a spin on this? So that was pretty cool. To the right of that, we have Paper Girls, which is actually a period piece. It is a comic, and that was the first time I had ever had the opportunity to design a project of sort, and then also juxtapose period to futuristic. And I don't mean like period of today, like it was 1990s versus 2070. It was two worlds that collided. Next, you have She's Gotta Have It. This is the iconic, well-revered, sought-after Nola Darling. And then finally, we have a picture of Andre Holland. This particular project was my first opportunity to collaborate with Steven Soderbergh. And it's funny because this particular project was shot on an iPhone. So let's talk about capturing a character, because a lot of people ask me, how do you costume design certain characters? What helps you get into it? And truthfully, I tell them it's quite simple. You have to love to read and read again. And what I mean by that is once you get a script, be it for stage, television, commercials, opera, it does not matter. You have to read the script, literally line by line. You have to take the time out to read the script. There are going to be indicators in the script that will tell you certain things about a character, but there may be indicators in the script that tell you nothing about a character. And so you have to understand how to read in between the lines, or I think right now, I would write down the word infer, so that you're kind of like putting the pieces to the puzzle together. And the only way you can do that is if you literally sit there and go through each scene. I would say take a step back, write down your notes, jot down your notes, and then go back and read it again. And you'll be reading it again and again and again. And the reason why I said is because scripts are always and continuously updated. So we have 3 projects here that I have designed. We have Passing, we have BLACKKKLANSMAN, and then we have Mamie Till Mobley's memoir. The reason why I have these images here because I think it's quite important. Passing, the movie that I designed was truly a reflection of Nella Larson, right? But there are certain things in this book that I had to read to implement into costume design because it's specific and it's not in the script, if that makes sense. BLACKKKLANSMAN is another. You know, I had the opportunity while in prep to have a conversation with Ron Stallworth and ask him questions, but just kind of doing the dramaturgical work and just pretty much filling my brain up at that time with this particular project, it was quite important. Because clearly, you know, the topic is about how he overcame or he outsmarted the Ku Klux Klan, but you know, there was references about Kwame Ture and in the student union that once I was able to kind of decipher who would wear what, I could always go back to I say this is truly like the script, right? Because it's the Bible, but then you have the script that the movie is based on. Death of Innocence was extremely important to refer back to. And the reason why I said that is because it's a particular scene in Till, which actually happened, unfortunately, right after Emmett was taken from us, where Miss Mamie wrote in her memoir that she wore a black dress once she picked his body up from the train. And that's, as a costume designer, that is extremely important to keep that integrity to how she wrote it in her memoir and truly what happened in real life. Unless you're given the opportunity or you take the road of using some type of creative license. But typically when you're doing biopics, you kind of want to you should stick to the script as best as you can. I mean, you know, all of these are period, right? So like you have Passing, that's 1920s, you have BLACKKKLANSMAN, that's the 70s, and then you have Death or Till, that was the 50s. So these are vastly different, but they're in these books, there are things and like nuggets that you can pull out of. So not only are you reading the script, now you're reading books, you're probably reading articles, and 9 times out of 10, you're reading magazines to try to put everything together so you can properly design costumes for a character. So that leads me to my next point. Once you get to that point, you've gathered everything. And by the way, you're not going to stop gathering. So I just want to throw that out there. You want to ask yourself, why does this character dress the way that they do? And what color best represents this character? Just comes to mind. I mean, sometimes when I'm designing, I'm like, well, what is this person's favorite color? Why do I want to put them in this color at this particular moment in the scene? And how is that what is that going to communicate on camera or, you know, to the viewer? So you ask yourself questions such as, how can the use of wardrobe evoke emotion or a lack thereof? Because there is a lack thereof. Then I think that's the beautiful marriage between, you know, kind of overestimating something and underestimating it. And meaning you don't always have to costume design it. It could be a caricature. There's something that balances it. So here we have a little snippet of Passing, which I mentioned earlier. It is a 1920s movie. It was completely shot in black and white. I must say, it was beautiful in color, but it was something that was quite electrifying when Rebecca Hall told me that she was going to shoot this particular movie in black and white, and how my use of wardrobe and silhouette and even accessories and texture help elevate the story and truly make it feel real. Particularly with the hats that you see to the far left. The iconic photo, of course, of Tessa is the image right below her and Ruth. And then you have, for those who've seen the movie, you have the image Tessa right before Claire's demise, which if you haven't seen it, I'm not gonna give it away. It's a cliffhanger for sure. But then you also see the image of Tessa looking out the window. Now that is actually in color. So you can see how beautiful and the flow and how it was important to balance the weight of fabric in this particular scene and in this particular era. Because what I refused to make it look like was, how do I want to say this? I refused to make it look as if the two worlds were the same. Claire was from a different world, and Tessa's character was from a different world. So they needed to look like they were coming together, but they were separate. Here are some renderings, and just production photos, behind the scene photos of passing. Funny enough, we actually filmed this in Harlem, in Strivers Row. And here you can actually see some of the costumes in color. So you can see how I had to flip back and forth. And I do want to say there were some looks that if I was to show you, you'd be like, wait a minute, that does not go together. But it was beautiful in black and white. It was the trickery of the eyes is quite interesting. So here we have color theory and costuming. This is extremely important for anybody who has watched any of my productions, stage, commercials, TV, even recently me, collaborating with Usher on his Vegas residency last summer. I love color, and that is extremely important, and it will always be important in my design. So here we have a very happy photo of myself and Danielle. For those who've seen Till, you know that the pink dress, I laugh because the pink dress actually was a beautiful mistake, unlike the yellow dress. But what I was adamant about the opening scene of Till having Mamie in a dress that evoked happiness and hope. It's rosary. It's like rosy, I mean. But as she's driving, it's almost like she's having a premonition. And that's a really beautiful scene. And that's when we are introduced to Emmett. So we go to the yellow dress, which I had no idea, truly, that this dress would be so iconic to this particular story. Where you see Danielle actually watching Emmett leave Chicago. And let me be very clear, and I've said this in interviews, Chinonye has said it in interviews, as well as Kurt Beach, who was the production designer. Yellow was assigned to Emmett. So further on, we're going to get to the conversation about symbolism, but this dress, as well as Emmett's tie, which you see in the exhibit, which my costumes were on display at FITM, it was almost like it was specks of Emmett that was dropped from Chicago to Mississippi back to Chicago. And then you even have Alma here, who was played by Whoopi Goldberg, where with this, I was strategic about what colors I put on Whoopi, particularly in the era, but then more importantly, I'd wanted to not necessarily make her feel like a matriarch, but someone who had access to a sewing machine, someone who had access to fabric, because again, based on my previous slides, you have to read, right? And so in reading and doing research, I found out that Mamie's mother was a seamstress. So her costumes, or her wardrobe, if you will, was a tad bit different than her daughter's. So here we have an example of cool colors from the movie Till. And as you can see, Emmett's, as I mentioned earlier, Emmett's tie has specks of yellow, so they're still warm there and they're still cool there. And that's something that you truly won't be able to avoid, right? Unless it's purposeful and it's monochromatic. But choosing a navy blue suit for Emmett was important because he almost looked like a little, I would say it to my crew, like he almost looked like a little man. He was well put together, but having him in such a color leaving Chicago and then his mother in yellow, that was a beautiful marriage. And then you have the photo of Mamie, Alma, and her friends. And this is a scene where there's someone there comforting Mamie. And in this scene, as you see, is quite cool. I mean, there is some warmth there, but it's primarily cool. And then to the far right, Mr. Emmett, played by Jalen, he's actually in a cool button down silk, raw silk, I must say. It was very, 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 the fabric was not comfortable at all. And I did that on purpose, but just kind of keeping that through line and that thread between him in Chicago and now him and this is the look that he wore when he was in the cotton field. So here's just a little bit of a breakdown of warm colors and cool colors. So you have a visual reference. It helped me. And it's also something, if you decide to go further into color theory, most of these colors will repeat themselves. And then, like I said, there's a mixture thereof. So warm, you have convey feelings of optimism and warm energy. Red and orange can evoke a sense of urgency, danger, and sensuality. Cool colors convey feelings of calmness, relaxation, and regality. And then we have symbolism. That's a conscious or subconscious association to a given color. For example, green can symbolize jealousy, envy, while white can symbolize renewal and peace. I think it's worth noting that since we've talked about Mamie, that in the movie there is a distinction in when her wardrobe was of color. Obviously, we have the morning of her in black, and then her wardrobe then changes. There's almost, I wouldn't quite say a decline, but we go from different types of cool and warm colors of grays, browns, and blues, some of which made it to screen and some of which didn't. She's got to have it. So remember I mentioned the idea of symbolism. For those who've watched the show, this is episode, of Oshun, Nola with Mars. This is episode 7. And this is when Nola is actually going on a self-discovery voyage in Puerto Rico. So I actually rendered Oshun, which you see Nola taking a photo of in the mosaic. So that's a reflection of my rendering. And in this scene, Nola's there, and then she sees the personified version of Oshun actually walk past her. So it's like it comes from the wall, and then it becomes the person or the spirit, if you will. And that's extremely important because, one, when designing something like this, meaning a Yoruba character, there's so many things and so many elements that have to take place, particularly if you're not of that practice, that it has to be right. And I was thankful enough to have a consultant there to help me through that process, and understand that, yes, Oshun is yellow, but yellow can be a mixture of all colors. So I actually chose a certain fabric that it was a light taffeta that once you actually see it closely, it was a mixture of greens, oranges, yellows. It was actually really pretty. And then we have Nola with Mars to the left. This was after she had her ceremony, and she sees the younger version of Oshun. Purple. Remember I said earlier that you have to ask questions. So one of my questions for the director was, what is Nola's favorite color? And for anybody who knows and has followed the director, you know that prior to COVID, he would have a huge block party for Prince in Brooklyn. So Nola's color was purple. It made sense. Prince was her favorite artist. So every chance I got, I definitely incorporated purple. And as you see the gift to the far right, that's a really cool scene. Everybody had on different color values of purple, which is also a part of color theory. Lesson 3, we have period pieces and historical references.
From the beginning, it was very important to make sure that we did this in the most authentic way. From the wardrobe, working with Marci Rodgers and creating textures.
Music has a texture just like fabric. It gives me a vibe when I design costumes. Being that we were able to bring wardrobe to life in each era, it's inspirational. So this particular project, I mean, this is me to the far left. This was the first time I met Usher, and he's being costumed in a period costume, and we had to make sure it was right. There was elements of this costume that could not be missed. And so what I appreciate about Usher is when we came together and we collaborated, obviously he was the number one, so his costume was a tad bit different from everyone else's, but he still fit in. This particular project went from, it went through several eras, and then we ended in the 90s. And it was pretty cool because at that time, having to dress someone like Usher and not necessarily put him in period costume, right? But understanding history of costume, I was able to find pieces locally where we filmed this to feel like it was a through line between the era, which was important to Usher as well as the director.
From Parisian nightclubs to New York underground parties, cognac notes resonate with our rhythm and blues. It might feel like freestyle when you listen to it, but it's different, it's deeper, like a quest for excellence, like a glass of Remy. After all, there's nothing more beautiful than when talents team up to create harmony. I hope it inspired you.
So the image to the far right was actually the end of the short film. And it's funny because it's almost a replica. I shouldn't say almost. The idea was that it was a replica of the 90s, right? But what he's actually wearing is something that is very, very, very contemporary. The brand is Fear of God. So understanding how to maneuver contemporary costumes, be it fabric, weight of fabric, color, which is important to some eras, by the way, and silhouette to properly communicate, period, is extremely important.
Said a man want to see me.
Alley out back.
Can't come in here. What is he, white?
So here we have, this was a movie I actually filmed in Detroit. It is based on the area Black Bottom, and this was a period piece. It was a 50s piece, actually. And it's funny because the jacket that Mr. Cheadle was wearing, I actually got, that was very contemporary, and that was Ralph Lauren. And I say that because, again, going back to the character, right, I had to ask questions. Why would he wear this leather jacket? Why does Benicio del Toro's character wear a suit when they're both criminals? The answer, they come from two different worlds. And when you get deeper into sectioning off where each character lives and where they shop or don't shop or how they gather clothes, particularly in period pieces, you can come together and build a wardrobe and build a closet and then build the appropriate costume for the character. So here's the image of the jacket that I just mentioned. That's at that time it was contemporary.
Well, we're waiting.
I'm alright. Don't nobody worry about me. You got to give me a fight. Why don't you just let
This particular project is my second Super Bowl project, and it is a, I guess, rendition of Caddyshack. I guess I'm telling my age too, because I watched this movie as a child, and clearly Caddyshack is period, right? But at this point, we had creative license to still stick within the worlds of characters, if you will, but having different silhouettes from different eras come together, which is still facts, right? Like some people still dress like they're in the 90s or 2000s, early 2000s, and create this world and bring color truly to a golf course, right? And so, because the golf course is green, so how did my costumes accommodate the world of the element? At this point, it's elemental when you're outside. So we have Brian Cox here. That was a costume that was pretty much a direct replica. And then on this slide, we have Serena, who her favorite color, remember I said, it's sometimes you have to ask what color is connected to a person or a character and what it means to them. Serena's favorite color is purple. That is public knowledge. So in having our creative license, unlike the gentleman that's below her with the hat on, who was the character who played this role, he clearly has on a pink shirt and white pants. We decided to put Serena in purple. Alex Morgan, who's there with her peace sign, she was the young lady who played the niece. So I had to recreate her costume, one, to fit Alex, and then two, when you're dealing with commercials, the idea is that you're helping through through the vessel of costume design to sell the product, right? So sometimes you can't necessarily, and you shouldn't unless it's approved, put the actors or on camera principals in any type of brand. So I had to recreate Alex's to be a reflection of the former actress. And then we have Jimmy Butler here in Canelo, where they're just really at this point, this has no association, period. It's more so like them as cool celebrities holding Michelob cans. That concludes the presentation. Are there any questions?
Awesome presentation, Marci. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone who's joined us. It's Kyle from Creatively, coming in to get your questions answered. I see you've dropped quite a few in the Q&A. We can just go straight through them. So let's dig in. Marci, Daniela asks, is there anything you wish you would have known when you started?
Yes. And I'm taking a little while to think about it because, you know, my intro to costume design was not it wasn't easy. I was, at that time, I was the only African-American woman in my program. I started clearly behind the mark because like I said, I had no experience. So what I wish someone would have told me was not to doubt myself at that moment. But I'm glad that they didn't tell me, because every day it was like a fuel. I like would just ramp up like and just keep going because I didn't want to disappoint myself and I had a point to prove. But I guess to sum it up, I wish they would have said, take time for yourself as much as you can. And there are going to be times where you're going to miss out on life, right? But like try to circle back and don't isolate yourself.
I think that advice can stand true for almost any career, especially creative careers, right? Like, make sure you take time for yourself. All right, moving to the next question. Laura asks, can you offer advice to those of us who are just starting to build a portfolio for the first time?
What can I offer you? You have to be okay with constructive criticism. And understand that it's not personal, right? I always tell people it's like oil and water. Once something becomes personal, you'll never go back to business. And you have to understand that, yes, we're creatives, right? But I always keep in the back of my mind and my business brain that you're there to do a job. You're there to be creative, but you're also there to be a leader. You're there to be a friend. You're there to be a support system with actors. Sometimes you're there to be the liaison between your department or two. It's a lot that goes into it. It's not just throwing costumes on the screen or on stage. So in short, Reggie used to tell me all the time, people call it show business, and it's actually business show. Meaning you do the business side of it actually is somewhat more important when you really look at it than the creative side.
Absolutely, 1000%. A few people have asked different variations of this question, so I'm gonna kind of mix and mingle them together. So they're basically asking about your role and what you do as a designer, right? In terms of if you are illustrating and sketching, if you are sewing and creating costumes, like give them a little insight on the extent of everything that you do as a costume designer.
Everything. And I said that very forcefully. In theater, which is why I specifically put theater or stage, if you will, in my presentation. You know, when you start off in theater, you're not going to have a Broadway budget. You're going to probably be at a theater that has a small room with a sewing machine, and it'll be you and probably not an assistant. And you're going to have to figure out, especially regional theaters, you're going to have to figure out how to put on a costume, how to actually design a show in time for tech. And so, in answer to your question, yes, I do know how to sew. Yes, I do illustrations. Yes, I do fabric swatch. I actually enjoy fabric swatching. That's also a part of understanding characters and feeling and touching. It's sensory, right? I do, if I have to, like I said earlier with Ron Starworth, if I have to ask questions and get to the person, I'll ask them questions. You do a lot. Even at my level, you never forget where you come from, if that makes sense. So if it gets to the point where I have to sew on a button because my tailors are building a costume, then that's what I have to do. Or, you know, I actually enjoy illustrating and working with different mediums because in University of Maryland, that's how I was taught. Helen is actually, her background is visual. She's a visual artist. So I had to learn how to illustrate in watercolor. And for anybody who's familiar with that medium, that is probably one of the harder mediums to work in other than oil because it has to be controlled.
I love the diversity of skills that you have. So combining two questions again, what's your favorite part about costuming, and what has been one of the proudest moments of your career thus far?
I love fabric swatching. I mean, you like it all, right? And so it's like ebb and flow, right? Like you get the script and you're like, oh my, you start to visualize things, but then you move from script to research, and you're like, oh, there might be that one image that you find, and you like print it out, and look at it, or it looks at you. And then you go from research to rendering, and then you go from rendering to fabric, and then you go from fabric, or you actually start to pull costumes down, because if it's period, obviously, depending on the budget, you could pull the costumes, which you would get from a regional costume house. And then once you go the route of building, which is fabric swatching, to see it come to life is magical, and that's priceless. But to see it come to life on an actor, and an actor feel like their character and they voice that, to me, that's priceless. And I've had that happen, and I've had it said to me so many times. And in those moments, I guess to answer your second question, that is my proudest moment, right? Like I've been blessed to collaborate with some of the greats and be in the presence of many of the greats. But when an actor says, I feel like my character because of how I was costume designed, even if it was down to the lapel pin, that's something that no award can give you, right? Yes, you want awards, but you should not sign up to do this for awards. The integrity of your work will get you to that point when the universe meets with that idea.
Absolutely. That's the flow of things, right?
Right.
So combining another couple, stemming off of what you just said, a few people are asking, how long are you given to even, create costumes for a project? Like, what are your timelines and the deadlines? Like, have you ever missed a deadline? But also within that, what does the process generally look like when you're, from script to creating the costuming?
No,
I'm
you don't.
hoping you never missed a deadline at the career you're in.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say you can't miss no. No. That's a whole nother class. Uh to answer your question, I think the process is ongoing, right? So when I got the script for BLACKKKLANSMAN, I was actually in Dominican Republic doing my the movie there. And I was in the middle of filming, but what I did do, the first thing I did was I read the script, I watched Malcolm X, and I watched Birth of a Nation. I had to get my mind into it, right? And then funny enough, when I got back to America, unfortunately it was the riot. I mean, it was the protests at in Virginia where the young lady was murdered. She was ran over. And the first person I saw on screen was David Duke. To me, that was quite serendipitous. That's when I knew that particular project, I was aligned. I was supposed to, I believe in spirituality. And so I was like, okay, God, this is a sign, right? So fast forward to Till. I got the script for Emmett Till, and or it's Till. And before I had even started prep, I'm from Chicago, a proud Chicagoan, and I literally just rode around the city. I rode around the city. I tuned into some, music from that era sometimes as I was reading the script, and just tried to get the vibration of it all. I mean, wardrobe is what it is, right? But like, to me, music is quite important. And that was one of the things that I learned in grad school. Why do people dress the way they dress? What music influences them at that time? And so, although quite sad, that was something I had to do. when I designed Till. But to wrap that up, when I was offered the opportunity to do the Vegas residency, that was a short turnaround, but a rewarding one, I should say, because it it's almost like you can do it.
Right. I mean, after you do films, you know, doing
Yeah.
that, I'm sure it was like a break a little bit.
It was.
Yeah. So, following that, this is a good question. How do you choose your projects, right? And do they present themselves to you, or how does that go? And how it says, how did this impact your start on in the industry, like in terms of choosing your projects?
I mean, I think it goes back to like my earlier slides. I manifested being in this industry, right? And so how do I choose my projects? They choose me. I think, and that's funny, I said this last night. When I got into this industry, I knew that I had an assignment that was greater than what I could envision or what I said. And understanding that I would at some point be revered as a designer who keeps the integrity of culture. And there's no race connected to that, right? And for my costumes and my design to be relatable. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes. I think this is a fun one. In terms of sourcing pieces for a project, what are your suggestions and where do you conduct your research mostly?
I'm gonna say the last. I'm going to answer the last one first. Go to the library. I have sat in FIT's library, literally gone through the decimal system, and been like, wait, did I forget how to do this? Go to the stacks and pull a book. You are not too cute to do it. And trust me, that will set you aside from someone else you don't know who you're up against. But when you come and you're getting those little nuggets, it helps you in your process to answer your first question when you're sourcing, because your mind, it's almost like your brain is taking like mental pictures like quickly, right? And so you can pull up your research or digitally, or you can have it printed. I like to print. Me personally, I know we're in an electronic age, but it's just something about having a physical piece of paper somewhere out into the universe. It connects, and everything, like I said, it's funny because it's kind of magical. It like all comes together. So you have to go back to the source. Pinterest is cool. I'm not saying that I don't do Pinterest, but if you don't understand history of costume and you're presenting yourself for a job and it's a different era, and if you know anything about history of costume, you'll know that most of the eras mirror one another. If you don't, there's a lapel that might be too big and you're in a different era, you don't have the job. The only way that you can figure the job out is if you read. You actually have to go to the library. Oh, and watch other movies. When I designed No Sudden Move, it was actually at the beginning of the pandemic. I took a mean step back and I actually studied Alfred Hitchcock movies and Edith Head. And that's when I noticed my design matured greatly. I mean, it was at that point I had done more contemporary, right? But to be in an era and to make it look classy and just different, like little nuances here or there, she just knew she had it, and so you have to study. So you have to read, you have to study and study the greats.
And to follow the little last piece of that, where are your favorite places to source? Like costume houses, what? Like, what do you like to?
Everywhere. You literally, you're like, I tell people, I'm a visual historian, right? I just so happen like to dumb it down. I'm a costume designer. I can literally be walking, like right now I'm in Soho House in Chicago, and I have this red thing behind me, this curtain, but I'm looking at scones, and and I'm like, oh my God, those are scones. Like, how can I almost want to take a picture of it because they look like icicles. Now, what if I get the opportunity to design a movie or a play, and they're like, we want these costumes to look like icicles, and I'm like, I should have took a photo of that. Everything is relatable. Everything should be coming. That's why I said it should be coming in texture, the way that things are designed, uh production design, set dressing, lighting is important. I'd even go as far as say locations. All of that goes together. So that is truly where I draw my inspiration. And I'm not just saying it, I'm actually being serious. Like it is important to not ostracize yourself into the world of costume design in that way, because it's almost like, yeah, you can get tunnel vision, but all of these worlds have to coexist anyway. So why not crossover?
I love it. As we begin to wrap up, I want to kind of focus on and sorry to any of the questions we haven't gotten to, it's just a lot, but I want to kind of focus on two particular questions here, and they're about collaboration. Since Marci is part of our Creatively Cultured group of 30 artists who selected some of their favorite collaborators. If you guys haven't checked out Creatively Cultured, go do it. But Marci is one of the selection committee from there. So it would be fun to talk about collaboration a bit. As a leader, how do you choose the teams that work with you? And also a few people have asked about possible assistants or internships, so you can drop that in there too. But as a leader, how do you choose the teams that you work with? What do you look for in people you don't know, but would like to give a chance?
For sure. I've been blessed to have crews at the start of my career, even until now, that believed in me and believed in the project, gave their all. And more so, they believed in the director, but and I said it because having to choose a crew, it also depends on where you are. So I travel, right? So I might be necessarily based one place, but I can, I just finished a project in New York with Steven Soderbergh, my third project. It was a TV series. So my crew there, my core crew travels with me, my assistant costume designer and my wardrobe supervisor. And then, when I did Teal, I had no one in Atlanta except an assistant costume designer. So, and we have a rapport. So how did I choose her? Truly, at the time when I was transitioning to Detroit to do No Sudden Move, I actually needed an assistant costume designer. And I called someone who I had a rapport with, and she wasn't available. She was like, this is like one of my closest friends, call her. And it really, we just worked out. It meshed. So you'd be surprised. I mean, there's an interview process, but once you get to a point where you're doing 2 or 3 shows, just because you have a core crew doesn't mean that you don't need a secondary crew or a third crew. And that happens a lot. But it is something that should be said about trust and vulnerability, because truly we're all artists, right? But you want to have someone around you that you can be vulnerable around in those moments where, as an artist, you're constantly going and going and going and going and going and going till you're depleted some days, especially depending on the project. And 2, it's almost like if I start a sentence, they can finish it. If that makes sense. In my absence.
It absolutely makes sense. And to wrap things up, this is a good follow-up to that. Who are the main people that you have to collaborate on a production? Example, director, art director, cinematographer. And also, have you ever had to really fight to make your vision, clear versus what others wanted?
Lastly, yes, to your last question. sometimes when you're on a project, you may have producers who may understand or they think they understand different races that they aren't a part of. And you have to liberally figure out politically how to say this might be another way. But the skill in that and the craft in that is making it their idea. What was the first question? Before that?
I'm pulling it back up. Hold on.
Because I had to get people. I like when people actually
So
ask.
many. So who are the main people that you collaborate with throughout the production?
Everybody. And I say that because, listen, one thing I learned early on is people never forget how you make them feel. Yes, I used to be a recruiter, so I'm pretty good at names, right? But you're literally, for those who work in production, you know this, and hopefully this is a gentle reminder. You need to be nice to everybody. You have to collaborate with everybody, because the question about missing the deadline, if you have a connect here that might be like, okay, well, the schedule might be changing, and you have no idea that that's about to be a curveball, you will miss a deadline. You have to literally spread your tentacles. Typically, when I'm on a project, my new best friends are the production designer, obviously the director, the producers, my team, and a couple PAs, because they're going to be the ones that are like, okay, production assistants, Marci, this is coming up if we're filming, or this is about to change. And I'm thankful for that. And one thing I want to end with, yes, we're talking about costume design. Yes, we're talking about my process. But I always tell people thank you. I always give a thank you gift, even if it's a Starbucks card. You have to make people feel, because so much at the end of it is like, ugh, or, you get to the premiere and everybody's like celebrating, but it's those moments where you're in the trenches that nobody's going to pat you on your back and tell you good job. They're just not. And because they're trying to get through it. And so you have to be able to have some type of grace in class, even for the person who you didn't necessarily interact with well. Give them a thank you. Leave on how you started, how you should end. You didn't know the person before you got through, you went through production. You might not ever talk to them again. Give them a thank you. It's no skin off your back, and keep it moving. And they will forever remember you for that and call you back.
And thank you. And everyone in the chat is thanking you too. All thanks to you. And this was wonderful. I am so happy that we had these moments with you. We are ending at an hour on the dot. The timing could not be more perfect. I'm gonna share my screen so that everyone can see Marci's Instagram account. Go follow her, and also find her on Creatively. And explore her collaborations on Creatively Cultured. If you missed it when I dropped it in the chat, it's creatively.life/creatively cultured, or you can just type in Creatively Cultured when you're on Creatively on the app or on the website. But you can find all of her and her collaborators there and all of her other work. Check out her website, all the things. I am so happy that we did this. Thank you all for coming. And we'll see you at our next Creatively classes. This will be up on our YouTube within a week's time, typically. But thanks again, you guys.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.